and welcome to the Red Pill 2020, where the light penetrates the dark corners of the mindset which unconsciously fosters corruption and injustice. It is claimed that the National Rifle Association created the citizens' inalienable right to keep and bear arms. It is said that the Second Amendment was a right for the states to maintain their own militia, and it was merely a spin job by the NRA that caused the Supreme Court to confirm that the Second Amendment does cover citizens' rights to bear arms. At a time in history when there was no standing army wholly funded by the government was all too happy to accept support from a militia comprised of unpaid citizens who were armed and ready to defend their country, even at the cost of their own lives. The founders seen clearly the purity of this ultimate system of checks and balances. The founders also warned against the international bankers who would stop at nothing to violate and usurp the Constitution and control the nation by funding it with false currency. Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 8 says, Congress shall have the power to coin money. The enumeration clause stated that the government has no authority to do anything unless the authority is specifically granted to the government by the Constitution, and nowhere within the Constitution has the government been authorized to delegate the coining or printing of the nation's money to an outside party, especially to a party who would be loaning that money back to the government, which, by the way, and to make matters worse, was a foreign party, a private bank, the elusive international bankers. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed into law, basically to protect that bank from government audit. If you were to look up a summary definition of the Federal Reserve Act, you would find that it describes it as, quote, an act to provide for the establishment of Federal Reserve banks, to furnish an elastic currency, to afford means of rediscounting commercial paper, to establish a more effective supervision of banking in the United States, and for other purposes. The Federal Reserve Bank issued credit to the government and pushed for the law to provide itself with zero accountability, whereas the government had and still has no jurisdiction over it, but is bound to repay it. Any debt accumulated, that debt is currently $22.7 trillion. Most people think that the Federal Reserve is part of the United States government. I laugh when people think that the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, is part of the government. In fact, the Internal Revenue Service is an internal collection agency within the private bank named Federal Reserve Bank. But that subject is not the thrust of this episode. That subject is merely a point in which one should understand that after millions of Americans died settling matters of territorial occupancy of the North American continent, these international bankers assisted providing the central government, also known as the federal government, with the funds needed to have a standing army of its own. No longer would the state governments have to depend upon its citizens to defend it. If the government wanted to act against the citizens, that system just wasn't going to work out. If the special interest individuals, especially those associated with the Federal Reserve, needed the government to act against the citizens in order to protect their interests, the militia just had to go. If the government wanted to invade other countries for the purposes of maybe opening markets for American capitalists to exploit, that system of militia simply can't work. But the states also wanted to create and maintain their own army, which is now called the National Guard. The states wanted to have sovereign control over this resource of military, defense, and force. The states wanted to make sure that federal troops would not invade them without a fight. It was thought ludicrous that such a thing could ever happen. The states also wanted to assure that the militia could not hold them politically accountable through military force. Well, we all know what happened, and we know how it worked out during the Civil War. The state militias, along with federal troops, did in fact invade states. And if you add up all the American casualties, those who died in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and every American conflict thereafter, the total number of casualties in the Civil War is more than double of any conflict and represents about half of all the wars combined. So that was a vicious war that was fought for our rights. Again, this particular topic of sovereignty and international bankers is not where we're going to go in this episode. It's just a point to remind ourselves of the real life, real-time seriousness of this subject. Where we are going to go is here. The militia, for all intents and purposes, has been disbanded in its previous form. State provisions has stopped, and troops were basically inducted into the National Guard, to whom now the federal government provides training through the United States Army. This new system has sort of effectively cut out any form of resistance the citizens could practice when government becomes overly tyrannical. And it will become overly tyrannical. All governments do. Regardless of the type of government we're talking about. All governments end in calamity, but only after massive suffering and oppression are inflicted upon their own people. There is no denying our human history of government systems. America was the first country known in modern history to put real power in the hands of the citizens. Why is that? Well, first of all, the government had no choice in the matter. When the government came into being from nothingness, the citizens were already armed to the teeth. They did not actually put this power into the hands of the citizens. What happened was they simply did not have the means nor the desire to take this power away from the citizens. When I say real power, I mean the only type of power there is, and that is armed individuals capable of inflicting violence and fatalities on enemies, both foreign and domestic. In the end, this is the only real political power in existence. Dissolving the militia was a slow process that has disintegrated the power of the citizens down to small factions and individuals who cling onto their rights to have and bear arms. They have been confused and misguided by ideas of their rights to hunt, collect guns, or to defend themselves against criminals. Although those things are rights, those rights are subordinate and derived from one primary right, to have and bear arms. Those who attempt to splinter and break the groups into subordinate groups are unwittingly guilty of weakening the true and meaningful purpose of this inalienable right. To have a right to bear arms is to own, possess, and control them physically. To bear them is to show them in open carry. There was never any restriction to this inalienable right to require arms to be concealed, but if one wanted to conceal their weapon, it was simply a personal choice to do so. Now, regardless of what the National Rifle Association has done, or what the Supreme Court has said, or what some delusional child may believe, the rights of the citizens to have and bear arms are inalienable rights, and they do not need a constitutional provision to sanction their validity. It is the government which needs constitutional provisions to sanction its validity. Now, no doubt, the National Rifle Association has done much to bring this fact into recognition. But even the NRA did not create this right. And there's no majority that can think, believe, dream, or vote any inalienable right out of existence. Government, with or without the support of any majority, can only infringe upon inalienable rights. And citizens only have two choices as to what role they play in this subject. One is to support violations of inalienable rights, and two is to oppose violations of inalienable rights. If the Second Amendment can be violated by any means, all other rights are instantly in process of infringement. To move forward with the goal of this episode, disavow any discussion regarding the existence or importance of the citizen's right to bear arms within the Constitution. And we move to clear it up by ridding ourselves of all the talking point ambiguities. We must also consider the ingenuity of government persistence when we consider the rewording of the Second Amendment in terms which cannot be confused with changing conditions of time. Now, before delving into my draft of my proposed solution to the current number of conflicts surrounding the Second Amendment, one should acknowledge that the current single sentence Second Amendment must be expanded in complexity, very similar to some of the more comprehensive amendments within the Constitution. And here's the goal of the new amendment that I propose. First of all, let's just diminish or completely eliminate an individual's right to bear arms if that individual has abused that right to such a degree that they've either taken another person's life, injured another person, used a gun to commit a crime, or have been convicted of a violent crime. Now, that's even if the crime didn't involve a gun, because inherently, violent criminals need not be legitimately armed, right? Such regulation wouldn't really prevent anything. It would merely make the act of possessing a gun a criminal act for those who have abused the right in the past. It would merely make it possible to arrest, convict, and incarcerate such individuals, even if they didn't commit any other criminal offenses, other than, of course, possessing the firearm. In a way, it's sort of like throwing them back into prison for the same crime in which they've already been punished. But, I'm not going to get into entertaining the complexity of how double jeopardy may be infringed upon by this particular amendment, because nobody really cares about criminals, right? So I'm not going to stand here and argue against the anti-gun opponents while trying to find a way to protect the rights of violent criminals who have provided the very excuse that causes the entire conflict to begin with. If it's not their goal to disarm law-abiding citizens, I have what I believe is the solution. But if it is their goal to disarm law-abiding citizens, and I suspect that it truly is, I will not waste my time describing what I think the solution to that problem should be. And there's millions of law-abiding citizens who's going to agree with me on that particular issue. Let's keep in mind that that segment of millions of citizens are armed. Those who wish to bystep the Constitution or empower their favorite politician to violate and infringe upon law-abiding citizens should keep in mind the ultimate price that may be paid one day for such traitorous acts. The new proposed amendment would say, an adequately armed citizen being necessary to the security of the national republics of the United States, the rights of the citizens to own and possess firearms shall not be infringed. A citizen relinquishes protection under this article, as enumerated herein, when they have abused this inalienable right by committing unjustified crimes of violence, by use of firearms, if found guilty by trial. The United States government may pass into law regulations only as enumerated herein. The individual states may adopt such laws, but shall not otherwise pass any laws restricting the citizens' rights to have and possess firearms. Now, the first one is criminal disability. The new provision would say any citizen who's been subject to suspension of rights under this section shall have their rights automatically restored 5 years after having been convicted and served any term of incarceration related to the applicable defense. The inalienable right to protection under this article is unwaverable. The government may, through a prosecutorial process, seek to extend each individual citizen's disability up to an additional 5 years if the related offense rises in severity to warrant such judgment. The next section is going to talk about the types of firearms. Firearms are defined as a weapon capable of being discharged by an individual mobile person without any mechanical assistance. Fully automatic firearms or other firearms requiring mechanized assistance may not be owned or possessed except by those citizens who can produce evidence that they have legally owned and possessed firearms for the past 5 years. License or permits may only be required for citizens to own more than 10 fully automatic firearms. The third one is covering demonstration, protests, and associations, sort of like what we saw take place in Virginia. Citizens' rights to bear arms are extended to encompass protest, public assembly, and association, while in physical possession of firearms, whether concealed or open carry. Government may restrict physical possession of firearms inside of specific government buildings, but may not restrict otherwise permanently or temporarily. The next one is state of mind. A citizen may not be permitted to possess any firearm while in public if under the influence of any mind-altering substance in the same manner as may be restricted for operating a motor vehicle. Any citizen diagnosed with any form of psychosis, coupled with any history of violence within the past 5 years, may be restricted from possessing firearms in public for a period of 5 years through legal process, but cannot be restricted from possessing firearms within their own personal residence or domain. Number 5 is age requirements. The government may pass laws to prohibit persons other than legal adults in accordance with the legal military enlistment age from purchasing, owning, or possessing firearms. The government may not regulate such activities of a non-adult while under the supervision of a legal guardian or extension thereof. Non-adult persons may, in fact, possess firearms for the purpose of sporting events, training, or exigent circumstances. The sixth one is regarding manufacturers and merchants. The government is prohibited from taxing or regulating manufacturers or merchants of firearms in any manner differently than non-firearm manufacturers and merchants. Manufacturers shall not be required to maintain records regarding who they have sold to, except when selling or shipping to a foreign entity beyond the territories of the United States. The seventh one is regarding self-defense. The government may not prohibit, under any circumstance, a citizen's right to use deadly force for self-defense. If under direct threat of assault or while protecting another person from assault, a citizen may use deadly force. Deadly force shall not be permitted by a citizen during pursuit of a violent offender unless the citizen has invoked their right to make a citizen's arrest, and at that time becomes subject to all the same restrictions that may be applicable to a police officer. Now, number 8 is a compulsory law that the government must, by mandate, administer. Any police officer or officer of the courts, including those within the jurisdiction of any state, shall be subject to mandatory criminal prosecution for infringing upon the rights protected under this amendment. No government official shall be indemnified or protected, regardless of personal or official capacity, by any total or limited immunity. Number 9 covers police authorization of deadly force. Police are prohibited from even asking any citizen if they are armed unless a felony arrest is imminent. At any time, a citizen is engaged in open carry with a firearm held at the ready, the police officer may order that citizen to unhand the firearm and cite them accordingly. If a felony investigation is in progress, warranted by reasonable suspicion, a citizen may be disarmed by a police officer during the encounter. Anytime a citizen takes poise to reach for a firearm during a police encounter, the use of deadly force by the police may be authorized. And the last one is regarding the discharge of a firearm. The government is permitted to prohibit the discharge of firearms in defined city limits or specifically zoned areas, but may not prohibit the discharge of a firearm in the act of self-defense or protection of another person or property clearly in grave danger. There comes a time when discussion must transcend to action. It is my intention to send a polished version of the new constitutional amendment draft to various organizations, our legislatures, and to the White House, actually. This episode of the Red Pill 2020 sat in the editing software much longer than intended as I contemplated how that presentation appeared and, of course, how it would be concluded. Now, I could have done a better job on the new amendment draft, but to be completely honest, without the involvement of other people, there's just no possibility that I could single-handedly draft a constitutional amendment with the degree of perfection that Americans would deserve. So what I have decided to do is ask for others to discuss the new amendment and the sections within it. Currently, there are 10 sections, and those sections probably need to be broken down into more numerous but shorter sections. The main reason why they need to be broken down is because inside of some of the provisions, or all of the provisions, is contained, categorically government prohibitions, government requirements, and government authorizations. Before anyone could offer a comprehensive alternative, the purpose behind each of those elements would have to be properly considered. I would hope that I could get participants to engage in discussions on each of the draft sections. I have made the new amendment draft available at the Red Pill 2020 Google Drive. There's a shared link there, so please feel free to access it, print it, rewrite it, make comments, or whatever. All you have to do is type this link into your internet browser. I encourage those who are interested in this subject to comment on this video or send an email to the redpill2020@google.com. Let me know if you would like your voice to be heard here on our program. Hit the like button and subscribe below. I appreciate your support as a viewer. Please know that this channel is not monetized. I do not sell any products, nor do I ask for any subscription fees or donations. I think it's obvious that I put a great deal of effort into producing my videos, and obviously I've incurred some expenses for the tools to do so. I do this only in hope that something I say just might make a difference to someone who might need to hear it. I also do this to cause myself to be exposed and to hear things that I might not otherwise hear. I love being challenged to the extent that I have to change my point of view. It doesn't happen very often these days, but I do realize that this is not going to be possible for me unless my point of view is out in the open for other people to critique, disagree with, or attempt to modify in some way. So I'm a big proponent of the First Amendment. To all peace-loving and freedom-loving people, I wish you well.